We're here late in the afternoon at the Arctic Futures Conference 2050, and we have the opportunity to spend a little bit more time with a number of the panelists that we had in the tabletop exercise demonstration. And our guest right now is Randy Gauntt, who has just recently retired from Sandia after 37 years of working in many different facets of nuclear reactor failures and understanding how accidents happen and what response is like. And we also here with Sherri Goodman from the Wilson Center, and myself, Peter Davies, also from the Wilson Center. And we're going to just have a little additional conversation about some of the key questions that are of interest and that Randy has insight to. So Sherri, over to you.
Randy, what are your top takeaways from the demonstration we did earlier today on a nuclear shipping incident in the Bering Strait?
I think some of the top takeaways are the importance of bringing together all of the different potential stakeholders in this, and I think it was a really good learning experience for everyone. Impressed on me the diversity of people with alternate prior experiences, such as the Deepwater Horizon, or in my case, the Fukushima accident in Japan.
And as a nuclear expert, what keeps you up at night when you think about a possible nuclear incident in the Bering Strait?
Prior to this workshop, I was really not aware of anything north of the Arctic Circle, and all of a sudden, all of this news information about Russian reactors and Chinese tankers and so forth, I had no idea the area was that busy or opening up this quickly. It's almost like a gold rush scenario, it seems like to me. So what would keep me up at night would be, another experience like 3 Mile Island or the accidents at Fukushima. These things are not supposed to happen. Their frequency is supposed to be extremely low, and so often the people in this field feel rather like the Maytag repairman. They're never gonna practice their art. And along comes one of these black swans, so to speak, where a number of improbable things happen to perfect storm sort of lining this up. And so it could happen. And someone else said earlier, maybe it's not a question of if, but more a question of when, especially as traffic through this region and the use of things like nuclear icebreakers becomes commonplace.
In your comments on the panel at one point, you commented from your experience working on reactor failure and accident analysis for commercial nuclear power plants in the US, that one of the tools that you and your colleagues use is an analysis tool, a probabilistic risk assessment. And the question I have for you is, if you think about this kind of scenario, it's a very different setting, is what kinds of information would you need to actually do that kind of analysis? What would the analysis look like, and what kinds of things would we learn from it?
Sure. I think it's really highly advisable to do a risk study of some sort, and you might consider some triage type risk studies to see what really matters, and some things you could do to bring together some of the computational skills we heard about, the atmospheric transport and ocean transport, maybe to just consider some potential scenarios where there's a radiological release and see what the consequences, economic and health, might be. Try to ferret out what are the chief drivers of this. Now, a full risk study you would need to aggregate things like the historical data on storms, and we heard during this conference how things are not steady state. They're not like they used to be. Every storm is bigger. But to gather that information and, use that as part of the frequency analysis. How often do we have these types of storms? How much traffic is going through? And perhaps drawing on other maritime experience to gain actuarial data on how often do things fail, how often does equipment perform reliably, to use that to feed the frequency part of this analysis. So gathering that information would be useful, and I think a triage kind of a study up front would be a good kind of a screening exercise that should be done.
Following on the question of how to use a risk assessment better to define the future risks in this region, how would you engage the indigenous communities in that type of study?
I think that's an interesting question, because a big focus on this workshop here has been on the use of traditional knowledge, and there's certainly good actuarial data, over the human memory, I guess, of the people here that would be really invaluable to feed again the frequency, what type of weather, how do things evolve. A challenge, though, for applying risk methods is that things are changing. And so with the weather changing, I'm not really sure how to get our arms around what's the next biggest storm going to be. So that's an interesting component to this continuing worsening, I guess, of our climate situation.
Randy, this is we had a table of experts, many of whom may end up on the hot seat during an incident like this in some role. And just to bring home the personal experience of it, I know that you spent a significant amount of time in the U.S. Embassy during Fukushima, working the interface between real-time analysis and high-level people from many different places with many questions. And my question is, what was that personal experience like?
I did not expect it, but in many ways, every day was like the previous day, and that was a constant flow of people, either from the Navy, admirals, the Japanese government, our government, seeking interpretation of information. And information, technical information, is coming in from all directions. It's unfiltered and generally unconsumable to laypersons. So a good deal of our activities there in the embassy was to take the information, drill down, and try and put this in a consumable form. Is this number big or small? Is this a bad thing? Is something bad going to happen? So we spent a lot of our time translating technical data into actionable information. And this was just a daily grind for a month, for me anyway.
All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate your being on the panel, and we appreciate your taking additional time here to talk with us.
I'm on call. Just
Well, now that we know that he's willing to be on call, let's end it there, because
All right.
we'll surely call at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.